Butterflies and flowers are beautiful, but have you ever wondered what life would be like in a world without nature's Santa Claus? I'm author Gwen Elise Clayton, and when I'm not writing paranormal fiction books, I like to play in the garden. When my husband and I bought this house in January, it came on 1 acre of lawn with about a dozen trees. So I could not wait to get my hands dirty and start putting pretty things in the ground. I knew I wanted to start with plants that were native to my neck of the woods because they help build the soil and attract all the bugs and microbes that help enrich the soil and support the health of the overall ecosystem. After centuries of deforestation and urbanization, we humans have really let our landscape go to pot. It's been a slow process here at Clayton Manor, but so far I have 39 new additions to our family of green beauties. Fingers crossed they survive my wacky approach to modified no-till gardening. If you'd like to see more of my year one garden experience, watch my video on native plants. I'll post a link in the description box so you can watch it later. A couple of weeks ago, I was scrolling through Facebook and noticed the Greenup County Farmers Market was having a celebration for National Pollinators Week. I had never heard of National Pollinators Week before, but my spidey senses, sure enough, honed into that. Some guy named Logan Dunn from the Franklin County Metro Park System in Columbus, Ohio, was going to be giving a presentation on native pollinator plants, and you bet I was going to go to that. Logan, tell me, why'd you come out here today?
I came out here today because I have a passion for native plants. It's been one that's been developed, and I love it when people get excited about this type of stuff. And those folks that are a little unsure of what a native plant is or what it does for our environment, they come out here, they love listening to the conversations, they get involved, and they start doing it in their own backyard. And frankly, that's what we need to do. We need to get these pollinator plants out there, build these landscapes up, and increase the diversity that we're seeing out there in the environment. So this is how I started out. All right, I grew up on a farm in Marion County originally, and we did a lot of mowing, right? Mowing was the way. We had to have these nice stripes. We mowed around a lot of things. Fast forward about 10 years later, in 2013, I bought my first house, and it had approximately 1.5 acres of grass. And so the first thing that I thought was, I had to mow this. This has to be mowed. It has to look nice. It's got to look nice and manicured. And so I began mowing it. And further down the road, I started realizing to myself that this was taking about 1.5 to 2 hours to mow. And I'm like, man, this is taking a lot of time to mow this yard. And I was like, and then I started thinking about the fuel that I was putting into it, the cost of the lawnmower. And at the end of the day, I really wasn't getting much out of it as far as, pretty flowers. I wasn't seeing any insects or anything like that. Of course, you'd get the lightning bugs that would just drift by at night, and you always thought that was the neatest thing ever. And so I wanted to do something different. And so I got rid of the lawnmower, right? This is my sheet with the saddle on it. No, I'm just kidding. It's really not. But this kind of gives you an idea. I established this no-mow area. So I just quit mowing, and I thought, this is the best way that I can do to create this wildlife sanctuary, if you will. So I quit mowing, and the grass grew much taller. I had a few things come in, like I had a few milkweed species, I had some asters and some goldenrods and things like that. And I thought that was really neat. And I was seeing some what they call generalist pollinators. What generalist pollinators are is they'll pollinate multiple different species of plants. They don't focus on just one particular type of plant. And so I was seeing a couple of those, but I was like, I want something more. I need something better than this. And so I started doing some homework. I wanted to increase the diversity of plants that I had in this no-mow area, and I didn't know how to do it. So I was very fresh. This was about 10 years ago or so. I was really new into this whole native plant thing. I was really new to the concept of just turning my lawn into a native plant sanctuary, if you will. So I did a lot of research trying to figure out why native plants are important, you know, what they do for our ecosystem, what they do for other types of insects. And I found out that there's just hundreds of native plant species that you can plant in your yard. From tall plants to short plants, all kinds of plants of different colors, varieties, and sizes. And the same goes for the pollinators. Now, what is a pollinator? Does anybody know what a pollinator here is?
It's an insect that pollinates plants.
Correct. Do we know why that's important?
Because flowers don't pollinate themselves?
Yes, very good. Yes, and plants need pollinators to regrow, but also produce fruit, which is then used by other types of insects and birds and things like that. And so we're creating this refuge for them to use this stuff. Now I live in the city. Why I chose that, I have no idea. That was a terrible decision on my part, but we make it work. It's about a half an acre. And I will tell you, when I first started this venture with native plants, the city really did not care for me, right? So they drove by my house. They were like, you need to mow your lawn. This looks terrible. You've got ticks and stuff in there. And I started thinking to myself, okay, so I can see where they're talking from an aesthetic standpoint with people looking at it. And I didn't want to just go and defy them because I knew what I was doing was right, but I wanted to do it in such a way that was more, not only from an aesthetic standpoint, more pleasing, but that would make it more inviting for other people to do it as well, because not everybody likes the way a tall grass prairie looks, because they often refer to it as weeds, if you will. But the fact is, you can do it in a variety of landscape designs to make it look pretty to your own, I guess, liking, if you will. And so I took a half an acre, and I've got this research station behind my barn. And the reason why I call it my research station is because when I had the barn built, all they put back there was fill. So there's like bricks and rocks and concrete and clay and just a bunch of nastiness. And I'm like, so we'll try this. So I threw seed back there for grass seed originally because I needed something to stop erosion at the time. And I was like, this is the only thing I have. We'll just try this. Nothing grew. I didn't have a single piece of grass. The dirt ended up eroding, and so I'm like, all right, let's try this native plant concept thing. This is actually 2 years later. I didn't do hardly any management. If you look and read a bunch of articles on how to restore prairies in your own yard, they'll talk about, you know, using Roundup as a form of site preparation. Does that work? Yes, but you're also exposed to dangerous pesticides in the process. There's other ways called solarization methods, which basically allow you to put down a greenhouse plastic, and you keep it down there for about 10 weeks, which will burn not only the grass but also heat that soil layer up, often killing that seed bank as well. That's another method. My method was, I'm going to throw the seed and walk away because I'm a lazy person like that, and I compost. I'm a lazy composter. I throw my compost out in the woods. We have a nice compost pile that we do. So I'm like, well, I'm just going to throw seed back here in the winter time, let that snowfall cover the seed, and as that snowfall melts and you get the freeze-thaw action of the ground, it's going to work that seed into the soil. Now, did I expect a lot of weeds like thistle and foxtail to come up the next year because I did nothing? Of course I did. I was like, this stuff is going to come in, it's going to outcompete this native plants that I've seeded, and I'm probably not going to have much of anything. But I had to see it for myself because there's just so much information out on the internet. I had to see it. Second year, I had a bunch of thistle like I expected, but I also had a bunch of coreopsis that came in. I had some mulberries, white mulberry trees that started growing in there. And so piece by piece, I started, when I had time, taking these plants out, these plants that I didn't want, like the thistles and things like that. This is my front yard. It's kind of hard to see. So when we're kind of going back to the city disapproving of what I'm doing in my yard, I started doing some more research and found out that there's actually shorter plants that I can put up front that can be a little bit more landscape looking. And so I mow absolutely nothing in the front of my yard. These are all plants that have come in, have formed nice clumps together, and they just work really well. I don't have any one plant in there that's going to just take over the entire bed, because that's not really what I want. I want the diversity, because when you have diversity in your garden, you have different insects using different plants. Even hummingbirds. Like if you've got some plants that have tube flowers, tubular shaped flowers, hummingbirds will come in and visit your flowers in there. You don't just have to have the typical sugar water set up in your front yard. You can have plants that they'll actually come to. And so we've got all types of varieties of plants. There's a lot of violets in there. They've kind of worked their way in, which we've been thinning out a little bit and putting different things in there to kind of make it diversity wise as far as coloration goes. So we've got whites and reds and yellows and purples, and then further towards the left, it's native-esque. So we've got some prickly pear cactus, which is our only native cactus in the Midwest. And we also have some stonecrop, wild stonecrops and native kind of ground cover, which is really nice and can be really well manicured. I'm also finding out that planting plants in the ground cover is actually works really well. So it's almost like a natural weed barrier. I know we've talked about cardboard and mulching and things like that too, but the native plants will actually grow up through that thick ground cover. And I didn't think that was going to be the case. I thought it was just going to be so thick that these plants were going to make it through, but it turns out that they do actually a really nice job of that. As my gardens get bigger and as we do more around the house, we're starting to see a lot of really neat species. And this species I am most excited about because this is known as the harvester butterfly. It is actually the only carnivorous butterfly that we have in the Midwest. And when you're talking about growing vegetables, having like a vegetable garden, these guys eat aphids. And so that was like they're not very common either. You don't see these guys very often. Typically they like wetland type environments. You know, if you've got some saturated parts of your property, or if you've got like somewhat low-lying areas, you'll find them. But I don't have a wetland in my yard, so I'm not really sure where this guy's coming from. So the monarch butterfly, if those of you don't know, is a specialist pollinator. It needs a host plant. That host plant happens to be milkweed. Milkweed is where it's going to lay its egg. It's going to rear the caterpillars through all 5 instars. What about ornamentals? Like everybody's always asking, I've got peonies, I've got hostas, do I have to remove my hostas? And my answer is no. And the reason why is because it's okay to have things that you like and that you hold dear to your heart. And say, for instance, someone got a hold of grandma's peonies and I don't ever want to get rid of it because it's my grandma's, and well, grandma can rest because we can keep it in our landscape, but we also want to diversify that, right? We want to add some native plants in there. That way we have that diversity of insects, and we benefit from pollinators as a whole. I mean, they're the ones that help pollinate these plants, that help clean our air, that help clean our water, that build our soil up. You know, these plants provide medicine, things like that. So in the end, finding harmony is the biggest thing. If we didn't have pollinators, we wouldn't have 80 to 90% of our native plant species here on Earth in general. So they're extremely, extremely important. And unfortunately, with the onset of development and everything else, we're losing that. And I hear a lot of people tell me, well, I don't have this big yard. You know, I've got this small yard. But if you think about compounding those small yards, one small yard is connected to another small yard that's connected to something else, and so on and so forth. So it creates this big complex. So everybody's space is important.
Afterward, I stopped by the sweet bee booth to get a statement from my friend Farmer Shane, who specializes in native pollinator plants. You may remember Farmer Shane from my video last March about spring gardening. I'll leave a link in the description below so you can watch it later.
We have 15 plus native bee species that are really good pollinators, and some of them are very specific, like a squash bee or a mallow bee. So a lot of our native pollinators are very specific. Also, a lot of butterflies, their larvae only have one particular type of plant that they can eat. So if you want to maintain healthy pollinator areas and habitats, then you need to really incorporate biodiversity with native pollinator plants. And the truth and reality is, while I'm a beekeeper and I love honeybees and I love the honey, honeybees are not native to North America. So we're going to continue to always see problems and struggles with them, but the native species are a little hardier. We don't get honey from them, but the years that I've had all my bees die out, I've still had native pollinators come in and keep my garden going. So it's very important, especially for small urban areas where you might not even be able to have honeybees, to keep native pollinator plants around. You're going to bring in those native bee species, wasp species, butterflies, and things like that. They're going to keep everything growing and living healthy.
I also went home with a whole bunch of new plants that Farmer Shane picked out for me. As the week progressed, I studied more about using native pollinator plants in your garden, and one of the things I learned was not all mulches are created equal. I had been using cypress mulch in my garden because my choices for purchasing bags of mulch at the garden center were either pine bark, and my husband's allergic to pine, so that was out. You could get the red, brown, or black dyed bark, but I didn't want chemically treated bark on my soil. You could get cedar bark, or cedar mulch, but cedar repels moths, so why would I want that in a garden that I'm trying to attract pollinators? And then there were shredded tire chips, which I did not want that in my garden. No, they don't break down, and if they did, I wouldn't want that in my soil. But they make very good playground mulch. So if you have kids and you're building a playground, look into getting the recycled shredded tire chips. But anyhow, not for a pollinator garden like mine. So that just left me with cypress mulch. A few days ago, though, I joined a Facebook group for pollinator yards, and I learned that cypress mulch contributes to the deforestation of Florida's cypress trees, Florida's old growth cypress trees. The best mulch is the kind you get from your local arborist. And my new friends advised me of a place called Chip Drop that delivers truckloads of wood chips from local arborists to your door. I'll leave a link in the description so you can check that out later. By the end of National Pollinator Week, I still had more questions, so I ran up to Sweet Bee Gardens to pick Farmer Shane's brain. So I am talking with Farmer Shane again.
Hey.
We're back here. Last time I talked to you, it was the spring equinox, and now here we are at the summer solstice. And it's Pollinator Week. Today's the last day of Pollinator Week. Tell me more about Pollinator Week.
So pollinator plants, unfortunately, have been classified as weeds weeds even in their name. Joe Pye weed, milkweed, ironweed. And the understanding that these are essential native plants, is really gaining momentum. So we are celebrating June because in June you kind of have the peak. You still have some of the spring flowers. You have some of the early summer flowers. So it's a good time to kind of show off all the different pollinator plants, how beautiful they are, how big they get, things like that. So we can help raise awareness to everybody that how important it is and how pretty they are. A lot of people never get to even see them bloom or smell how sweet they are. Because every time you turn on the TV, you're not a real homeowner if you're not cutting everything down and cutting everything up and throwing your chemicals and all that good stuff. So we're trying to educate people and make them more aware of the importance of things that are already here.
Now, what is the difference between having a cultivated, if that's the right word, pollinator garden and just letting your grass, not mow your grass?
Okay, so that can go in several different directions. So one issue is a lot of grasses, especially if you are living in a place that has been zoned and just tore up and put into subdivisions and have grass and stuff sown. That stuff, a lot of grasses have been engineered or designed to kill native broadleaf plants. So, if you live out in the country and you kind of let things grow, you might get some of the clovers and a few things like that. But we have done so much damage to some areas that if you don't help the pollinators get started and established, you're really fighting an uphill battle by just letting everything go. You get grass, the grass reseeds, and you just have a problem. A lot of problems when you live in towns. You have ordinances, homeowners associations. So, just letting things kind of go, you might have to be a little bit more poignant in how you design and landscape, because you don't want to get in trouble and pay fees or fines, or have someone knocking on your door saying, hey, you got to get all this gone, or we're going to, you're going to face consequences.
What is the difference between a pest and a beneficial?
In a healthy environment, you will have natives that could be considered pest and beneficial at the same time, or at least you have a balance. So for example, I plant some native pollinator plants, or allow some to grow, like the rue and the Queen Anne's lace or wild carrot, because they attract some wasps. Now these wasps, most people find them as bad. We don't want to get stung. Some of the wasps don't have stingers, but they have abdomens that are really big that make people think they have stingers. But those wasps are actually predatory wasps against grubs and caterpillars and things that you may not necessarily want in your garden. So you can kind of really go in what is your personal definition of a pest. The main bad bugs are the bugs that get imported, like the shield stink bug, like the Asian lady beetles, because they don't have anything that's going to be a native predator to keep their populations in check. And at that point, you might have to find some other measures, especially when they're getting in your home. There's some traps and things you can do. But it's a little mind-blowing, but there's even beetles that help pollination. There's beetles who help prepare a site, like a fallen tree, for something like a bee, a native bee species, to be able to easily burrow into to lay their eggs. So it's really interesting when you get into the, and I am not an entomologist, okay? I know, I don't even know a drop in a bucket compared to that. And thank goodness, just so you know, we have a state entomologist. So if you find a bug or see some bug damage in your garden, you can reach out to your local extension office, and they can help you get in touch with the local entomologist to help figure out what that is. Because when you do something like a 7 dust or a Roundup, not only is it extremely unhealthy for you, but it is a non-discriminatory killer, which means you're going to kill the bees and all the positive bugs too. And the problem with that is the bugs that you're generally wanting to get rid of tend to bounce back faster than the good bugs. One of the reasons why we have a problem with the shield bugs is because they were heavily attacked with the pesticide, and the juvenile bugs became unaffected by it. So now we're kind of stuck because they adapted where a lot of the other pollinator species that we want don't adapt. So then you get an unbalanced ecosystem. So there's a lot of intricate things, but look in your area. There's resources you can get. There's the local entomologist, and kind of try to figure out what you have around you, and then decide whether you define that as a bad bug or not. I'm allergic to bees. I'm a beekeeper. So I'm not the most logical person to talk to when asking about what are the bad bugs and what do you need to do, because I kind of like them all in the right balances.
What about mulch? Do you use mulch?
I do use mulch. There's a couple different ways to address mulch. One, you go buy mulch. Generally speaking, when you buy the mulch in a bag at a local nursery or greenhouse or at a big box store, most of that mulch is outsourced, which is still okay because they go through a process. Most of the time they heat treat it, which means they run it through ovens to make sure that there's nothing bad that they're going to transport in the bags of mulch. That's not a guarantee, but it is a huge step in reducing the risk of that. I don't know of any place around here that uses a chemical to treat mulch, although if you don't know where your source is coming from and the bag doesn't tell you, you just have to go by faith. What we do out here on the farm is we have had local companies that clear the power lines and stuff to come out and drop wood chips. So wood chips are basically just the raw wood that has been put through chippers and it's dumped. Nothing else has been done to it. So we don't know. We don't know what kind of wood it is. We know it's locally sourced. We don't know if it's been treated with anything. We don't know any of that. So what we do is we let it set for at least a year. So if you get a sign up for the mulch dump, wood chip dump companies, or you come across someone on your street who's doing that and you say, hey, can we dump it? You want to let it set for a year to make sure that any of the chemicals or acids that are naturally in trees kind of get washed out. Things like black walnut trees and hickory nut trees, which we have a lot of in this area, put chemicals in the ground to slow down or prevent the growth of things. So you certainly don't want to use that around your garden. And again, if it has been exposed to a chemical where they clean up the lines and stuff, you want those to be leached out of the ground, which the sun and the weather over a year does a pretty good job. So if you're using mulch as a weed barrier, you want around 4 to 6 inches. Anything less than 4 inches, you have a good chance of some of those stronger weeds of shooting up through that. But if it's 4 to 6 inches, you pretty much have good weed suppression, as well as there's a big barrier between the mulch and the soil. So if some seeds blow in there, you can real easy pull those plants up when they're young, and it's not like you're out there fighting with these mature weeds that are, rooted in well. The other thing you need to consider is that for the first 3 to 4 years, you are not going to have much nitrogen content. The wood takes a good time to break down. So if you're going to plant in mulch, or you want to do a back to Eden type gardening or no-till type gardening, and there's several different aspects of both of those, you want to be able to feed your plants. You can do that with manures, manure teas, if you're okay with doing something. I understand, y'all know if you follow the Facebook page that I'm big on sustainability, so we use chicken manure because that's what we have. I understand that there are people who live in small subdivisions, apartments, older people, people with health issues, so maybe you need to use Miracle Grow. Whatever you feel comfortable doing within your power to do it, that is what you should do. You decide the risk, you decide what you're comfortable with. But as far as the mulch, the first 3 to 4 years, you're going to need to feed your plants a little bit. About year 5, you are going to start seeing really good mulch break down into really good soil. Another thing you can do to try to enhance that is you can get some mushroom mycorrhizal spores. There's a couple of different varieties that go good in mulch, so you can inoculate your mulch with that. That benefits the plants, plus helps the mulch break down faster. And one of the reasons why that is really helpful, under natural circumstances, it takes 10 years to make 1 inch of good topsoil. And when you look at especially our little area, and a lot of areas through Appalachia that are connected to timber or coal, you've had a lot of not only that surface soil removed, but you have the mineral rights, which means people are coming in digging into the clay, which takes an even longer time to try to rebuild that soil, because before you can start rebuilding soil, you have to reestablish a healthy native plant system, a healthy native insect system, and then you have to have those natural processes going. So with mulch, you can kind of cut that time in half to help you reestablish a healthier growing space for your garden, for your flowers, or whatever. So there's a lot of benefits. There are some issues. If you come out to the farm, you're going to see my main mulch garden is mainly covered in plastic right now, and it's into June. And the reason is because I had some horse thistle come in. Horse thistle or milk thistle really loves to grow in mulch, and it's hard to get rid of, so we're trying to use a smothering tactic, which again, we're having to use plastic. Okay, so plastic is a petroleum-based product. So find what you're comfortable and what you're able to do. Cardboard works good. You still have to weight that cardboard down with something, because if you've ever tried to do cardboard, you know it doesn't take much of a wind to start blowing it everywhere. So there's a lot of different fun techniques and challenges. And it's something that's really good because part of farming is about family and community. That's one of the reasons why we do it. So you have people come over and help move the mulch. You have an activity of doing something together that you see those results grow over the years. And that's just something that really connects and unites people in ways that a lot of other things can't.
Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of this video. I know it was longer than usual, but we had a lot of good stuff that I felt was important to cover. And thanks so much to Logan Dunn and Shane Fields for sharing their wisdom with us. Please give this video a thumbs up if you found it interesting or informative, and be sure to subscribe to the Rivervine YouTube channel for more quality content. I'm your host, Gwenelise Clayton. I drop videos every Tuesday evening. Always nice hanging out with you all, and I hope to see you next week.